Thanks very much for coming along tonight. I'd like to welcome you to the Quaker Meeting House in the centre of Liverpool. This final seminar in our Making Liverpool Better Together series will take the form of a workshop where we'll invite everyone to engage together in exploring the reality of citizen energy in our great city. But before we start, I want to do what we normally do, and that is ask people to just turn to someone around you that you don't know and you didn't come with, and just introduce yourself by your first name and maybe where you've come from and why you're here tonight. So just 2 minutes of introductions to people you don't know in this space. One of the things that we try very hard to promote is people getting to know each other by name, and it's an important role for Engage in the city centre, the waterfront, to enable residents who come together to actually know who's around them, who their neighbours are. So thank you for that. This third seminar in our 2022 series focuses on the local scene, having explored first the history of democracy and the various ways in which democracy is being undermined. We understood from Dr. Vergara's presentation that democracy is the power that belongs to the people to be the authors of their own personal, civic, and political destiny. In exposing those situations where this is not what people actually experience in their democracy, we realised that there is much work to be done everywhere in developing systems of networking, of articulation at neighbourhood, city, regional, and national levels, sometimes called citizen assemblies. John Alexander, the author and founder of the New Citizenship Project, built on that foundation in the second seminar by showing us the shift that has to take place across all sectors of our society if we are to move from being defined as consumers to self-defining as citizens. He then told us about 2 places in England where this was happening with the support of their local democratic representatives. We looked at Kirklees Metropolitan Borough Council's Democracy Commission and Newham Borough Council's Citizens Assembly. I then went with John to Birmingham the next day to see citizens in action by attending their neighbourhood donut launch. And I was very impressed by the work of Civic Square, formerly Impact Hub Birmingham, in bringing together citizens from the Ladywell area to work with the Donut Economics Action Lab. John, in his talk last time, shared with us the Berkana Institute's theory of change, which is what we're looking at here. It's sometimes known as the 2 loops model. We have what's called the dominant system, as you can see in blue, which is what we're normally experiencing. We look at this through the perspective of democracy. So that's the democratic system we currently have. And every system has its ups and downs, and ours appears to be on the decline at the moment. You only have to look at America and many places around, and Europe in different parts of the world, to realize that we are not at the top. We are heading downwards in that blue. At the same time, present is what's called the emergent system. There are places and people already beginning to look for something different, beginning to wonder what's going to come next. And you can see from that there's called the emergent system is happening at the same time as the other system is declining, the dominant system. And what we can see here is the group of pioneers in the dominant system. These are people who are innovators, they're pioneers, they're doing things. And one of the objectives that has to happen in this emergent system, if change is to take place, is that the people who are pioneers or individually innovators have to start forming networks. So the networks then become communities of practice and a new system begins to emerge. So one of the things John Alexander shared with us was how does that happen in different cities, in neighborhoods, in regions of our country, but actually all over the world. So there are 4 stages in what's called the Berkana Institute's theory of change. There's name, connect, nourish, and amplify. Sometimes it's called illuminate. And the place we're at here is somewhere between the pioneers and the networks. So we're trying tonight to look at how we can name what's going on and then begin to look at how we begin to connect people into networks so that something begins to happen, so that some change begins to emerge. And then those people in connected networks begin to nourish each other through communities of practice. This doesn't actually necessitate anyone from the outside coming in to sort things out for you. So this is something which can happen organically, and a new system begins to emerge. So in our seminar series, what Engage has tried to do is to initiate a conversation that we hope will amplify our reality, illuminate it, so that we can name what is going on and who is engaged with this change, in order that we might then be able to connect those people and groups together for mutual nourishment, in civic engagement for the journey ahead to a better functioning city and democracy. It's widely accepted that change happens only through working together and not through thinking our way into solutions. It is by continuous experimentation and the relationships built up through close collaboration that creates the conditions in which something new begins to emerge. I want to acknowledge, for example, the University of Liverpool's role in establishing the Liverpool Food Growers Network, founded by Dr. Charlotte Hardman and Dr. Beth Mead, which aims to create and sustainably develop an integrated network of community food growing projects, organisations, and related supportive partners across the Liverpool City region. I think mention must also be made of Chrissy Byrne, who, in her indomitable fight to save Walton Hall Park, then went on to found and chair the Liverpool Park Friends Forum, hosting 18 city parks and gardens. So Chrissy is doing what we can see on this diagram. She's a pioneer working individually to save her park, realised that she was up against some big forces, namely Everton Football Club and the City Council, and with her networking within Walton, managed to save the park from being built on with a new football stadium. She then realised this was happening everywhere. It wasn't just Walton Hall Park, it was Sefton Park and other parks as well. And then she began to connect those people from friends groups, so they're now organised together in the Liverpool Parks Forum, which is fantastic. So that's the kind of thing we're going to be exploring a little bit this evening. Also at the second seminar, John Alexander left us with a question, which we will use this evening to bring to an initial conclusion the seminar series. How might we bring together all the disparate citizen energy in Liverpool in a way that truly reinvents democracy in the city? So we're not trying to undermine anything. We're trying to bring something together that at the moment is not well connected and is disparate. And what we're looking for is citizen energy. Where is the energy in the city? Where are people working together or working individually with enthusiasm, with their own skill set, with expertise, in order to be able to harness that energy so that something begins to emerge from it? A little bit like a laboratory of citizenship. So we're not at all short of citizen energy in this amazing city. And so tonight we will work together to see if we can commence a process of mapping using the knowledge and expertise of everyone in this room. We're going to put you into, I'll have to have a count in a minute, into a number of groups, 3 or 4 groups, led by one of our facilitators, whom I will introduce in a moment. You'll be asked to identify and name who is in your specific group, and then the organisations and groups that you are aware of in Liverpool where there is citizen energy, whatever groups they are. It really doesn't matter. Neighbourhood groups, specific interest groups, where you find energy, where you know people are active and working. There will be many that we don't know about here, as our demographic is mostly limited to residents from the city centre and the waterfront. So it's a very small demographic group of people that come to the Engage meetings, and we're not pretending to be the city. We are a small part of that city, but we are a part of it. And we're doing something which I'm sure others might be well doing in the north end, south end, in the east part. I'm sure other people are trying to do what we are trying to do, and that is have a conversation around democracy and citizen engagement, which seems to be a good thing to be doing at this particular time in our history. What we'll then do is try to group those organizations that you'll come up with into connected themes, a little bit like the Food Growers Network has done. So lots of different people involved in growing food in community organizations. Well, let's start grouping them and see if we can name a particular theme so that we can begin to do this. If you remember the diagram that we had before, this connecting. You can't connect if you're not in a particular themed group. So we're going to look at what some of those themes might be that might emerge tonight. And then what we'll do is come back together in a plenary session and have a report back from each of the groups. I'm going to invite comments from you all about what the emerging picture looks like. And then we'll see if we can name specific people, individual persons, whom we trust and whom we think have the skill set to be a connector or convener within these different themes. So we may not know anybody, but we may know somebody we think she would be absolutely wonderful. She's a great person, a great connector. We're not going to allow any negative talk or comments about anybody at all, because that's not what we're here for. We're here to look at citizen energy, not that which is negating that energy. So we're looking to only be very positive and concrete. So if you don't think someone's good, they're not going to be mentioned. We're not going to say, I don't want that person because they've done this X, Y, or Z. So we're going to look at any names that emerge as being people we know we trust, people who we know can connect, people who we know have a skill set for convening and bringing together and can be teamwork. And if we don't have any names, that's fine. That's the reality we're in. But let's see what emerges in this process this evening. Hopefully, there will be time to ask everyone what you think about what should be the next step. To conclude the session, I'm going to ask our facilitators here to share their brief assessment of the process this evening and what they got from it. And I want to introduce you to our facilitators. I'm not sure yet whether they're all going to be having a group, because we had hoped that after our last meeting, which had about 40 people, we would have had a similar number, but tonight we haven't. So I'd like to just present to you, first of all, at the end, Richard Scott, Director of the National Wildflower Centre at the Eden Project and founder of Scouse Flower House Project and chair of the UK Urban Ecology Forum. Dominic Walker, who has the highest honour that Liverpool John Moores University can give. She's an honorary fellow of the university and now a lecturer within the School for Justice, teaching policing studies and policing communities. She's the founder, trustee and vice chair of the Anthony Walker Foundation, established in the immediate aftermath of the 2005 racist murder of her brother. Polly Mosley sat between, is producer, translator and researcher involved with the National Wildflower Centre, also Liverpool's Year of Health and Wellbeing in 2010, and currently climate justice producer for Contemporary Visual Arts Northwest, amongst her many other community projects and activities. And Andrew Beattie here on my left, writer and filmmaker and director of Wordscape, who with his colleague Fiona Shaw is responsible for this for the amazing Ethos magazine and is a lead on Kindred Liverpool City Regions communications and membership. So I'm really grateful to the four of you for being willing to come and support what we're trying to do tonight. So let me just count how many we've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 20, 22, 23, 24. So we should, if we have 4 groups of 5 people, 6 people, that should work. That doesn't count you group, okay? So I'm going to give you a number, and don't, under penalty of mortal sin, hellfire, and damnation, don't change your number. Just go into that group, otherwise you'll screw the whole process. So remember the number, and if you don't understand the number, I'll say it in Spanish as well, because everybody else is Spanish. So 1, 2. Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming back together again. Judging by some of the chairs, it looks like we've lost a few people, but hopefully they're only in the toilets. By the way, if you do need the toilets, they're on this floor, straight across through the main doors and just over to the left, if you need that. Right, we're just going to have a very brief report back from each group. So, Richard, do you want to start? Just two seconds.
Okay, very quickly. Just listing names and places, really. So it was a spectrum of people. Food features quite prominently in terms of squash, home-baked, street markets, Granby Market, Granby 4 Streets, campaigners, like people like Nina Edge and the Welch Streets, people who had to go against a little bit of the tide, but were pointing out the positive energy in retrofit, which brings us to kind of modern day champions like Barnabas Calder in terms of architecture in the city. But a variety of things like Park Palace Ponies, Friends of Rimrose Valley, people sticking up in very, very positive ways.
Wonderful, thank you. Richard, should we give a round of applause to Group 1? Holly?
Yeah, thank you. In Group 4, we had a real mix of people, some residents of the waterfront from Engage. We had David from the hospitality sector, Prerec from the health sector. Our themes that emerged were around residents groups, around arts and cultural groups. The residents groups, there's a group in L8, I think trusted people like Michelle Charters, Kumbra Mani, L8 Matters, Mandela 8, the Caribbean Centre. There's kind of a real energy around some of that work at the moment. In health, social prescribing networks, grassroots, well-connected, people doing work on the ground there. And then in terms of activities, Peloton Liverpool, trying to look at ways of making the activity joyful rather than task-orientated. And we also talked about Paul Askew as a chef for the city who does a lot in terms of social responsibility, and Paddy Smith, another chef representative of the hospitality sector. And I think the question and the kind of will of the group, which we didn't quite get to next steps, was very much around how can citizens of the city have their voices heard, be more connected into these groups that are doing the kind of work and actually feel part of something bigger than their kind of residence groups and so forth.
Thank you very much. A big round of applause for Polly's group 4. Dominique?
In my group, it's all the way over there. I'll sit here.
Enjoy the walk. Enjoy the walk.
In my group was Maria, Daisy, Margaret, Neil, and Nick. And basically what we focused on was a number of different organisations that were based in the city, and then some that were based obviously in L8 as well. What we did with those organisations was then try and connect the people. But ultimately, I think what our discussion sort of centred on was trying to come up with a strategy, so unfolding thoughts in relation to citizen energy, and basically making sure that we have a clear sort of indicators and a clear strategy in place for the work that we need to do, rather than just being a talking shop, rather than it being negative, for us to obviously take the work forward, connect the organisations, but then also do something actually with it as well. I think one of the things that everyone mentioned was universities as well. And then what we didn't have time to do was to set on sort of 3 different sort of asks or a goal, ultimately. But I think the thing that sort of came forward was about improving the living sort of conditions and, in terms of poverty and food access for everybody in the city as well. So that was some of the things that came out. But I think we needed more time, really. But thank you, Jerry.
Thanks. Thanks, Tony. And Andrew?
So I actually left the names in there, so apologies everyone that was in my group. It was arguably the best group, I think. In terms of kind of clusters, we've got place-based, so place-specific ones, resident groups or other organisations that are very embedded in their place. food, culture, health, well-being, broad environmental, natural environment like gardening, and then we also noted that some of the organisations we put on there, or groups, are actually networks in and of themselves. So on the face of it, they do one thing, but actually they're clusters of activity and other organisations as well. From my group, have I missed anything? No? Thumbs up? Great.
Thank you very much. So what we tried to do is just begin a process of thinking through what the city looks like from our perspectives, just who we are here. We're not L8, and we're not the North End, we're not Anfield, we're not Goodison, we're not Everton. We're here, we're from this particular place. But this particular group of people knows lots of things that are happening. And that's what I hoped began to emerge, the bigger picture that we're all connected with. And I think it's important that we give you a chance now just to say, you've heard the 4 groups come back. What did you feel like in your group? What would you like to comment on or share about that came up either as a comment or question you'd like to ask, or what's beginning to emerge for yourselves? And then just tell us who you are first, just your first name, and then.
Hiya, I'm Diana. For me, it's not one thing that emerged, but when you just said we're not L8 or we're not Enfield, but we can go there. So I live in the city centre, but I'm in L8 every week, or we go to Home Baked as well. So the city is open to everyone, and it's open to us to explore and enjoy and connect. So everywhere we go, we see people from others, so the connections are there. And that's why we can interact with other areas we don't have to stay where we live. And I think that's the beauty of it.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to make a comment?
Yeah, thanks. I'm Nick Small. I'm a city councillor representing the city centre. One of the things we spoke about, and it was right at the end, and it's when people say really interesting things right at the end, but it was a really good group, was around quality of life in the city centre and focusing on that and green space and what can we do to make the city centre a better place for people to live in. So a lot of the organisations we'd identified, some of them are civic organisations like universities or colleges, and business organisations like Business Improvement District, but it's how we bring those more closely into what residents are doing.
Thanks, Nick. Anybody else want to make a comment? Yeah.
My name's Grindle. I think there's a lot of overlapping wherever we live. Between all of us here, we overlap into various parts of the city. But I think quite often the kind of communities that we really want to engage with, it's about gaining their trust. And I know with some of the participatory work that I've done, you have to in some ways prove that you're there for them, that you listen to them, you respect them, and that they often know much better than you do about the kind of issues that they face. And I think, like the gentleman over here, talking how do we bring these things together. It doesn't have to be one big organisation, but maybe having a kind of depot where we all come to, and how do we get people on the ground, so your actual residents. And I know that there is an organisation, I don't know if people have heard of, it's called Pecha Kucha, P-E-C-H-A-K-U-C-H-A, and it started some years ago in Japan, and it was about sustainability and inviting and getting people involved and talking about sustainability. And it started with a group of students in architecture who confronted lecturers about the lack of discussion on sustainability, and particularly like in buildings. Now we know in this country that's an issue as well. And it has now gone global. So there are networks of pecha kucha right across the world, and often they're sponsored by councils as well. But it's a way of bringing people together where people can say what it is that they're concerned about, what are some of the solutions that we can talk about and how we bring it together. And the basis of this, how it works, is that a group or a small group of people are invited to make a presentation about something they may be specialists in or have a lot of knowledge about. And they do a 15-minute presentation, and you might say have 5 people who do this, and then it's an open discussion with the public who have attended that presentation. So you could set this up at very community-based levels, and that's another way of getting people discussing and talking about ways of how things could change.
Thank you, Grendel. That's really helpful. Have you been to one in Liverpool?
Yes.
Do you want to tell us a bit about it?
Not in Liverpool. I've
Okay.
suggested to the Greens that this would be a good way of getting down to the grassroots level and bringing other people in and actually having a discussion with residents, and you could make it a movable thing so it goes to different areas. I have done it back in New Zealand, though.
Okay, thank you.
What was the name of that concept again?
Pecha kucha. Yeah.
I think, yeah, there's an example of that actually does run in Liverpool called Ignite Liverpool. Ignite was kind of O'Reilly's copy of Pecha Kucha or Pecha Kucha. I think it's meant to be pronounced weirdly. But that already happens. It's fairly small, and it would be really interesting, as you say, to see like a resident, like focused version. Chit chat, yeah. I was just going to mention one thing that came out of our group, which was we were sort of talking about lots of, as you say, like quite serious, like gaining people's trust and solving problems for people and whatever. But there was also like examples, like we mentioned Peloton, which is the Liverpool cycling cooperative, and the fact that like Danny there is a force of nature, and it's all about spreading joy. And so I think there's different types of groups here. There's like serious problem-solving groups, and examples of resident groups that come together about particular issues. But there's also groups around like having fun and enticing, bringing people in, because it's a nice place to be. You get the same thing in places like squash, where people turn up and dance while they're cooking. Like, I think there's scope for different types of groupings and networks for different things, but I think it would be a shame to forget, like, there can be ones that are about joy and spreading joy.
Thank you very much. That's really, really helpful, Polly.
I'm just thinking in terms of the visual stuff. So where spaces have been transformed in the city from like unproductive dead space into kind of beautiful, like used productive spaces, there are a lot of those transformations that have happened that could be visually represented quite powerfully. But what I feel sometimes is there's like a glass ceiling on a lot of this community work. So where you've got community leaders who've done really good things, they need to have kind of professional development stuff organised so that they can start being in a proper advisory capacity. And in Nantes, for example, all planning is advised on by landscape architects who are really like, you know, in France, they're pretty damn hot, you know, the landscape architects. I don't think we have really necessarily in this city, like, really cutting-edge, amazing landscape architects, although obviously we have some. But I think in some way, if you could somehow group these community activists together and give them a bit of a, like, step up so that they can actually then have proper advisory rather than these kind of tokenistic roles, it could be quite powerful.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Yeah. First and then Graham.
Yeah, because I'm from a planning background, so interesting the government's concept of beautiful buildings, which is going to inform planning consents in the future. I think you could form focus groups around lots of these areas to concentrate, which people have touched on anyway. But I think Planning is very high regulation and law-led, so this is one of the things you have to combat against. And on heritage aspects, I think we've been completely let down, especially on the waterfront. To me, some of the buildings are completely innocuous and have no relation to the maritime history of Liverpool. And I think we had a focus group focusing on beautiful buildings, informed by government policy, and find a way around that to make heritage much more in the forefront of policy. Thank you.
Did we get anything about heritage and architecture? Any groups? You try not to be negative.
We did have one, like an example of like Lawrence Westgaff was a name that came out as a connector, sort of engaging with Liverpool's history, often like intangible history and cultural history that is sort of related to that.
Okay. Helpful, great.
Thanks, Jay. Graham Marshall, I'm a board member of Gauge as well. What we're talking about here is building social capital within the city and within the region as well. And the model around that is starts off at the base level of bonding, and Liverpool demonstrates that really well. Every time there's some adversity, the communities usually come together really quickly around that. What we don't do quite so well is bridging. And that's communities being able to link with each other. And the thing we do worst of all is the linking. And that's linking into what you were just saying then to professionals and also linking into the council. We're just not really very good at doing that. So communities are left in that position of getting along with their heads down and only really being able to have a voice when they have to fight something. And on the point of landscape architects, I'm a landscape architect. And I was a founding director of Liverpool Vision, so I've done my bit.
Thank you. I think that's really interesting about the bridging, bonding, bridging and linking. One of the things we've tried to do in all our seminar series over the years is to connect with the universities. So Dominique is here because we were looking for someone from John Moores to take part in this series. We found somebody from Hope who came to the last one and the University of Liverpool in the first one. And then I discovered that it was the University of Liverpool that helped to found the Food Growers Network. So there are really important roles. And we did the same with local councillors. We invited local councillors to take part in the first two seminars because we think it's important to link in with what's going on at the moment. Yeah.
Hello, it's Margaret. I'd just like to say about anti-social behaviour in the city. Not just of a day, and I mean not just of a night, it's of a day as well. You can walk along by, the town hall and there's all bars and people drinking 11 o'clock in the morning, and I think, you get people shouting names and different things, and also Bold Street has gone, well, to me it seems a lot scruffy. I know we've got more restaurants and bars, but along comes the ASBO behaviour. And if you're a woman alone of a night or of a day, it's quite dangerous. Also, there's bicycles and these scooters going past. So people in the 70s or 80s, I had to put one woman on a bus and walk her through the city the other weekend. And it's, they're quite scared with the boys on bikes and scooters flying past. And I think more should be done, more policing, and to stop this going in our city, because it's ruining the heritage, it's ruining the flooring and everything else, and just gangs of people at weekends, which you can, I don't agree with. There's that side, the downside of the city. The city's lovely in the riverfront, but we've got a lot of ASBO behaviour, I think.
Big stretch. Thank you very much, Margaret, for that. Okay. A last question, then we're going to shift the focus a minute.
Thank you very much for that. So my name is Tani. I'm a resident. I live by the waterfront. I've been coming to Engage since 2018. Thank you very much for your contribution. I just wanted to counterbalance, if I can use that word. So I sometimes work at the Royal and live by the waterfront, and I have really enjoyed that little piece of official two-lane cycle path that goes from St. George's Hall, and I can take it down to somewhere near Hanover Street to say this is also something that we benefit from in Liverpool. Just not to take anything from what you said, I've had experiences similar to that, but also there are things that kind of like lights up in the Liverpool city centre.
No, sorry, Graham. I'm just conscious, I'm watching the clock. I know it's not 8:15. No one's put the clock back here. So I'm very conscious. But we want to try and close around 7:30. I'm going to invite the 4 panellists to speak to help us wind things up. But I just want to ask a question to try and focus things a little bit. I'm very conscious that we've been noting down different thematics. We've got some names that have been coming up, which obviously we're recording and we'll bear it in mind. But what do you think now, working together, if we can imagine ourselves working together, what should the next step be? We've produced this seminar series. We don't normally follow things through into other events. They're often standalone events. But last year we did travel and tourism, and we've continued that connection because it was very important to Marketing Liverpool and to Culture Liverpool that we started something. And in fact, what we're doing is what this series is about, bringing people together to talk about travel and tourism, first of all, within the city centre and the waterfront. So we're continuing that process. What should we do next? I don't think Engage is the right organisation to lead anything in the city. It's not our role. It's not what we're set up for. But what should come next from what we've done? What should we do next? What would you like to see happen next from this? Just one step. What's the next step that could build upon what we've done tonight? What do you think? And Andrew's going to write a few things on the board. Yeah.
I'm Leon. I'd really say try and find a method to connect all the groups that we've basically named tonight, because, you know, it's what was said before about sort of making a network and just forming that and then sort of building on that. It's really important. Sort of, that's what really should come out of today.
Building a greater network. I wonder how we would do that. Anyone got any ideas of what needs to happen for that to take place?
I think it's about connecting people with each other, and there's no other organisation doing what Engage does. We mentioned, you know, there were lots of different names of organisations and people that came out in our group, and it's not about connecting them with Engage, it's also about connecting them with each other, because there's no one there, there's no one else in the city who can connect all these people together.
And I think one of the things, when we've been planning this, we've been thinking about is, it's not the role of a politician either. I think Grendel, when she said she had a conversation with the Greens, I was really pleased to hear that, because we're a Labour-controlled city, but there are people who vote Tory, there are people who vote Green, there are people who vote Liberal Democrat. And sometimes when things are led by politicians, it's not inclusive. And I think what we're trying to explore is citizen engagement and citizen democracy, which isn't in competition with the political sphere, but is another strata which, if it's healthy, it makes democracy really healthy, makes the city much healthier. So Nick wasn't suggesting that, of course, but I was glad that he picked up on the importance of connecting people. And so how do we do that? And, you know, it's a challenge. I was hoping that one thing that might come out, and we're just conscious of time, is we might have begun to identify, maybe when we've discussed this afterwards, some named people that we can invite who have your trust and your confidence to have another conversation about bringing a wider group together. So continue the process of connecting, but bringing some people from these different connections together. Would anybody like to respond to that or comment on that? Yeah. And I know it's Di.
Hi, yes, I'm Di. And this is something I mentioned to you, the other one I went to, the first of these things, which is, and I thought this whole thing was kind of connected with a thing called Liverpool Citizens, which is a picking up of an idea that was around 30-odd years ago called broad-based organising. Now, it's one way of doing things, and that is various big citizens groupings like faith groups is kind of one focus, but it might be trade unions, it might be housing associations, it might be so on. Bringing people together to kind of formulate non-party political but required things that we need of our politicians, but also of big businesses, of banks and so on. So now that is kind of restarting in the next few months, so keep an ear open for it. I don't know, you seem to be questioning of it when I spoke with you before.
I don't want to have an argument about keeping everything positive about Citizen UK. We've got let 1,000 flowers bloom. I've got no issue whatsoever. It's important what people do. But we're trying to do something which is different in that it's more organic and process-led and not part of a movement. Because movements, by their very nature, exclude people and groups who don't go along with what. So we're trying to have a discussion around how we do, well, if you can remember the diagram, how the disparate individuals, the pioneers, the innovators, how we can start to connect them. And Camilla Vergara's diagram of lots of little groups connected together in a city, in a region, that's the kind of thing and it's got to be organic. It's got to grow from the grassroots up. It's got to be citizen-led. So it's a very challenging thing. Sorry, who wanted? Grendel.
I'm also concerned about issues in relation to different groups in society. So we have young people, for instance, single parents, and talking and linking also into poverty. Now, we know there's been massive cutbacks on services for young people. Now, if we really want energy and commitment and involvement and really working across the community, so we're looking at different groupings of our society, and I think young people are really having a hard time just now, and I think it seems to me if we all decided in either individually or the groups that we belong to contact other groups of similar nature and say, how can we work together so that we can start to bring some consistency across the city, but also consider the different groupings in our society. So young people, the elderly, so groups like this where, in fact, I think are really much more in need for positive involvement and commitment.
Thank you. Thank you, Grant. You raise a very important point. I think while you were talking, I began to realise this is much bigger than we can handle. What we're suggesting here, what's emerging, is much bigger than we can do. We're just resident volunteers. No one's paid. No one gets any expenses or anything. We give our time freely and willingly for the benefit of the city. But it seems to me that the relationship is with the City Council in the sense that if the City Council saw itself as facilitator, then it would enable lots of things to happen like that because we don't have the database. But when you talk about connecting groups who are in a similar kind of area or theme, then we need to have somewhere where that can happen, somewhere where you can find out who the different groups are and then how to connect with them. So there is something going on here that needs to feed back into the council, and I'm glad we've got two councillors still with us here who I'm sure are listening very carefully tonight, and maybe we can have a discussion as well about what our next step might be. I'm very conscious of the clock, so I'm going to come to you first, Richard, but not for a question. So thank you for that, Andrew. I'm going to invite the four panelists just to give a brief comment, whatever you want to say, about what you've taken part in tonight, and maybe what you think the next step might be for yourself personally, your group, or what you think we should do. So keep it positive, which I'm sure it will be.
No, I think it's diversity, isn't it, in terms of the strength of the city and its community, which always outsiders recognise as special, which often we don't recognise as special as we should. I was thinking, obviously, it's the people who aren't in the room that you always wish were in the room. And I think I would just like to say, we had a conversation with a guy called Andy Cooper, who's part of a very creative crowd called Drawing Code. We forget there's groups like Whole of PlayStation now in the Echo building, We don't kind of feed on these creative minds. And what Andy Cooper was saying is, why isn't there, in terms of the culture of the city, why is Liverpool presenting itself as a very staid, conservative front at places like the Albert Dock? Why isn't there a fringe festival that is the equivalent of Edinburgh's in this city, which trades on the creativity which everybody associates with the city? So it'd be lovely to spark some of those ideas, I think.
Great, thank you.
I think there are other facilitators in the City Council. I think Radio Merseyside is a bit of a facilitator to give a lot of profile to some of the community activities. I think LCVS could be, it's got Sonia Bassi's leading it, and I think we don't have to look in one place for facilitation. The danger with the City Council being a facilitator is that the loudest voices get heard, that people want to be round the table for vested interests. And I think looking at kind of media as well and sort of challenging them in terms of the diversity and the voices that they give could be also valuable.
I think for me, I found today quite impressive. I'm quite impressed by you all. I've been sort of a community organiser since our auntie died, since 2005, and I was a lone parent soon after. So my community activism come off the back of everything that happened and setting up a charity and so on and so forth. What has impressed me today is that you've organised, which is essentially what we're supposed to do as community organisers and activists, is basically you've come together around an idea and then have started to set about a strategy about how you're going to do it. I suppose for you all, it's to take one thing away with everything that you've learned today that you're actually going to do. For everything that we've talked about, and we have took a lot of air and space to be able to do that, it is about doing the work. And for me, that's the most important thing, is we can chat all day and we can do this all night. If we're not doing the work, then it's just chat. It's air. Yeah, it means absolutely nothing. So for me, and that's what's impressed me, is that we've started this conversation, so there is an energy that is in the room anyway. And it's a positive energy. So it's an energy that we take out there in relation to what it is that we're actually going to do tomorrow, or what we're going to do when we get home as well. So for me, that's what's really impressed me, is that you've got a space to be able to start that. It should be a more diverse space. And those are the things that obviously myself and other organisations that I work with can bring. But it is, harnessing that energy that's here now and how we obviously take it forward tomorrow. And I just think you've started to do it, and that's what's impressive. And it's been a long time I've been in a space where it's community residents and it's all volunteers that we're just like, right, what is it that we're going to do? So I find it really impressive. So well done, you all. Yeah.
Not a lot more to add, to be honest to that. I think it was. I love kind of forums where people can kind of talk about their favourite community organisations and other places and people, to be honest. And so I think it's right. I think kind of over the series of events, and even kind of on from the conversations last year, there's definitely an energy kind of moving us towards something. So I think kind of, for me, continuing this conversation in whatever way that is, whatever the next steps are, is something I'd be keen to see happening, and finding that kind of if you say that it's not engaged, that kind of can lead this, then we need to kind of continue the work to find out who that is. Mm-hmm.
Andrew, I'm not going to take over, I promise you. Our office, so the Anthony Walker Foundation office, is based in LCVS, which is Dale Street. And when you were talking about being resident, I was like, I live in L8. But then my office and my staff all work here in the city centre. I'm here all the time with the university and stuff like that. My staff always say don't offer our space because that's what I do all the time. But I will offer the Anthony Walker Foundation as a space that you can come for your meetings and stuff like that. I'm more than happy to do that and accommodate you in that. My staff will kill me, but as the chair, it's what I can do.
Thanks very much, Dominic. Thank you to the four of you for those comments. I personally found them very moving. I think Dominic's contribution was wonderful, and I'm sure we'll all take something away from it. It's been really important tonight that we've not only had Patrick and Nick, two of our local councillors present who are listening to what's going on, which encourages me and I know the Board of Engage. But we've also had Michael Cunningham present, who's the lead commissioner sent to the city. And I'm going to let Michael have the last word to round up what you've been seeing and hearing tonight.
Thanks, Jerry, and it's been brilliant to be part of this discussion this evening. And very much like Dominique, I'm very struck by the energy, and why should I have been surprised by the number of groups that came out in, brilliantly facilitated by Andrew, but the number of community groups that came out just tripped off the tongue. Just offer a thought. The timing of this is prescient. Next week, I'm just going to be boring a minute and talk about government stuff. Next week, there will be a statement around money from the government, and it will be a grim statement. And that will affect what's happening nationally. It'll also affect what's happening locally. A couple of mentions from Jerry about the City Council. The challenges for the City Council, councillors in the room, for next year means that services which have been provided routinely previously will not be provided in the future or will change radically. And it seems to me that the docking in of groups like have been mentioned today is essential in two ways. One is to help the council think about how services need to be transformed, because they will need to change. The money situation will require change. So how can the City Council services change, and how can the community influence how they are changed? Point one. Point two, for me, is if the services are eroded, and there will be cuts. If they are, what does that mean for the groups who are being supported by the groups that have been spoken about this evening? So there's something for me about the burning platform that we're standing on which requires this conversation urgently, because there are very deprived and vulnerable people in the communities who will require continued support in a different way in the future. So the timing is brilliant. All power to your elbow, and if there's anything I can do to ease the conversation between this group and the people you represent and the City Council, then I will do my part in that.
Thank you very much indeed. It remains for me to switch the microphone off and use this one simply to express my thanks and gratitude. First of all, to David Webster, who's been filming wonderfully. We'll see what it looks like when we put it all together. The films that his brother Steve did first of all, and David did last time, are already on our website, and we've connected through our Grapevine newsletter, so you can see the talks. And tonight's will be put up as well. So we're looking forward to how we edit what we've done tonight. I want to thank Richard, Polly, Dominique, and Andrew for being facilitators and also panel members, and for their contribution. So can we give them a very special round of applause? Thank you. And I also want to thank the engaged directors who are here tonight for their support and for their vision, which sustains the work we do and enables everything we do to run smoothly. So I'm personally very, very grateful to each one of our directors, and to Michael Cunningham for accompanying us tonight during this evening's process, and also to our two local councillors who surprised me by their attendance tonight. We did have three and one has left us, but thank you so much to Patrick and Nick for being here tonight. And finally yourselves for coming. Delightful, and I hope you can trust us to try and take this forward. I'm not sure how. I'm left at the end with loads of swimming ideas, but we will let you know through our website and through our social media what we're doing next, and you can keep in touch with us always. Please make sure you're on our Grapevine newsletter. If you're not getting it, speak to Zarino straight away. Zarino there with the laptop. And also, we'd love you to have to give us a feedback form. We don't have enough, unfortunately, unless there's Reno turned up with some extra ones. No, we've only got a few. So if the dozen or so of you who really want to leave something really nice, please come over to this table and fill a form for us. It would be really helpful. I'm sorry we haven't got enough for everybody. But thank you and good night, everybody. Thank you.